Dyllon Williams is Missouri's first defensive back commitment of the 25 cycle. And I have to admit, that part of the team is lagging behind the rest in terms of recruiting. So let's talk about that and more right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And it seems like some people my age are still wounded that Kansas got the 2008 Orange Bowl spot over our beloved Missouri Tigers. Could the Tigers get similarly screwed in 2024? Let's break down why I think that's a heck of a lot less likely moving forward for the Tigers to actually get Mizzou'd, as a lot of people like to say. Also want to start the program by telling you that today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. And the 9th commitment of the 2025 class announced yesterday, Dyllon Williams from Demopolis, Alabama, Ole Miss, Kentucky, and Mississippi State, probably the biggest suitors there. Yes, a 3-star prospect. We actually have to slum it with a 3-star in this case. And of course, I'm being sarcastic there for sure, because as we know, of course, many great players in Mizzou histories have been non-4 and 5-star players. So we'll just have to see how all this plays out. And again, I tend to like to look at the offer list. Ole Miss, Kentucky, good to get that kind of victory on the recruiting trail against, well, what I would consider more or less SEC peers in those two schools. Now, I will say that while Missouri's class obviously off to an excellent start here, just 9 commitments, not something to worry about in terms of the actual volume at this point. I did think it was notable that this is Missouri's first commitment in the secondary for the 2025 cycle. And I have to admit, it does seem, especially when you compare it to the offensive line. I've gone on and on this program about how Mizzou has really leveled up its recruiting in so many ways. I think the ever crucial offensive line is probably the best example of that. But despite the fact that Missouri has been quite good at the cornerback position the last couple years at least, and put 2 guys in Ennis Rakestraw and Chris Abrams-Drain into the NFL draft this past offseason, it really does seem like Missouri's recruiting is lagging just a little bit. You just take a quick perusal of all of the offers that Missouri has put out at the safety and cornerback positions, and you'll notice that really other than Charles Bass, a 4-star safety from East St. Louis High, who the Tigers seems like a very strong possibility that Missouri will land Bass. But other than him, not a lot of 4 and higher star prospects in the secondary that really seem like any possibility for Missouri whatsoever. Many of those guys on the Rivals database have already committed elsewhere, in fact, and most of those guys are not names I've been seeing pop up based on all the recruiting, reading, and research that I've done. So not a real reason to panic or anything like that because, well, traditionally Missouri has not been exactly a destination for especially out-of-state 4-star cornerbacks and above. Those type of players tend to go elsewhere, tend to go to the more major blue blood type programs, and in particular in the Deep South, where a lot of those players come from. They end up at Alabama and LSU and programs like that. So if you're Missouri, it does go to show you, to me, this trend that hasn't totally reversed itself yet, despite some success in the secondary for Missouri, does go to show you that there is still work to be done in many areas of recruiting for the Tigers. But obviously, Drinkwitz and Brandon Jones, especially on the offensive line, have made huge inroads. Now, I have had a few viewers and listeners ask for updates on the North End Zone project at Faurot Field. Well, I can just tell you this, as somebody who drives by Stadium in Providence on a fairly regular basis, I haven't noticed any construction fences or anything of the sort. No cranes, no anything like that are happening at this point. The plan is for this massive project, which includes, of course, new video board, new sound, most importantly, more seating and more luxury seating at Faurot Field. Well, the project is scheduled to be finished, that's what they're saying now anyway, by the 2026 football season. Now, supposedly a new video board in the north end zone and a sound system are going to be ready for this season. Now, that's all of this schedule is still up in the air in terms of when it's going to start. None of it's really been finalized, but again, plan is for a temporary video board that can be moved as the project enters its next phase. So kind of interesting there that, hey, well, the video board will be there early, evidently. It's going to be interesting to see exactly what that looks like, especially on June 12th here. If I haven't seen any movement on the construction end, well, they're really going to have to move quickly, aren't they? Don't get me wrong. It was impressive the speed at which the newest practice facility was put up. No question about that. So I'm not saying it can't be done, just giving you my updates here from Columbia, Missouri as I speed by Faurot Field in my car. And speaking of scheduling, well, not construction scheduling, but football scheduling in this case, talked a lot about the kickoff windows being revealed for most of the games this coming season. Now, probably the most notable thing is that the Auburn game, Missouri's homecoming game, is going to be an early kick, sometime between 11 a.m. and noon. Todd McCubbin, I'm going to stick with McCubbin. Either way, he's at Mizzou Todd on Twitter. He's the Alumni Association's president, I believe, something like that. A big muckety muck over at the Alumni Association anyway. He says the SEC has honored these requests, meaning requesting for a later window for homecoming. He says they've honored them nearly every year. He says Mizzou homecoming will adjust and be ready for this fall. Grateful for the 4-month lead time. So like I said, I do think that whether you like the early kickoffs or not, it's just nice to actually have some confirmation months ahead of time. Not only, of course, for just travelers to every game, but of course the homecoming committees, the parades, all that kind of stuff. Nice to be able to plan that out a few months in advance instead of 6 to 13 days, as has often been the case in the past. And you know what? While I'm at it, one more scheduling note here. This is actually something for me personally, as somebody who is not a frequent attender of the homecoming parade. I guess I did it a time or two when I was in middle school band, but that's a period of my life best left in the past. But to me, much more important than that, I just like to see the stands filled with people. Now, hopefully the 24 season coming off the 23 campaign, all the success there is going to take care of that. But in the past, of course, there's been, well, deer season has definitely come into conflict with people being in their seats at Faurot Field. Instead, they're often seated in a deer stand instead. Well, Aaron Young on Power Mizzou, he's a Rivals message board user. I thought this was a great comment. He said, just realize this, best of all, is that the firearms portion of deer season is November 16th through the 26th, which are 2 road games. We're breaking the home attendance record this year, baby. All right. Good call, Aaron. And honestly, we might break it with or without the gun deer season, but hey, that can't help, especially during middling Missouri campaigns of the past. Yeah, a lot of people would be packing it in come November. Hopefully that's not the case this year, but I did think that was interesting to note. Frankly, I would be putting that request out there to the SEC every year. Hey, can we avoid deer season, please? That to me is a bigger deal than homecoming, but you know what? I'm sure a lot of you who are more into homecoming than me probably disagree. And for a while now, I've been saying that 10-2 is the magic number for Mizzou football this season to make the college football playoff. But some of the more pessimistic Missouri fans out there aren't entirely convinced. They've seen Missouri get screwed before. Could it happen again? Could it be 2008 Orange Bowl all over again? Well, I'm more optimistic than that, and I've got some pretty good reasoning as to why. I'll explain why coming up here in just a minute. But first, let's talk about one of my favorite things in the world. Let's talk about golf. And so often people will buy the next best driver, the state-of-the-art driver, just grab it off the rack. But you know what? That's a mistake, because no matter how good the tools, getting fitted can take your game to a whole new level. And you know what? At PXG, they'll even give you a dozen golf balls free just for getting fit for golf clubs. And if you are thinking PXG's high-performance equipment is too expensive, they're often less than the so-called leading brands. I've gotten my hands on the PXG Black Ops driver. Absolutely love it. Also love the Apache and one-and-done putters in particular. To me, I was just absolutely loving the feel of both of those clubs. I almost couldn't miss my target. It was beautiful. Sure, I'd miss my read occasionally, but I was hitting it exactly where I wanted to. And so PXG has really made me a believer, and they'll do the same for every golfer in Kansas City. Visit pxg.com/LockedOnMizzou to schedule your fitting at PXG Kansas City, 7517 West 119th Street in Overland Park. Get fitted for any club and you'll get a dozen golf balls free. That's pxg.com/LockedOnMizzou to schedule your fitting. pxg.com/LockedOnMizzou. Limit 1 dozen golf balls per person. Promotion ends June 30th. Other terms and conditions may apply. See store for details. And speaking of Kansas City, the Royals take on the Yankees tonight. And there's, of course, no better place to get last-minute tickets than Gametime. If you want to go tonight, you want to go tomorrow afternoon. Either way, tonight, Gametime can get you in. Hy-Vee box, $25 a ticket. Or maybe you want to go dugout box. Hey, they got some for just over $150 right now on Gametime. They got last-minute ticket deals, flash deals, zone deals, views from your seat, easy to find and buy MLB tickets, and for every kind of event in your area. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Whether you're a Cardinals fan, a Royals fan, anything in between, download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Now, there's no question that the loudest and most passionate moments I've ever heard, the craziest crowds I've ever been in front of in my life, have all involved the Missouri Tigers and the Kansas Jayhawks. But none of them really compared, especially just in terms of a unique 50-50 atmosphere where absolutely everything is on the line. And, of course, the 2007 game between Missouri and Kansas. Now, of course, we know Missouri came out on top 36-28. Again, craziest game I've ever been to. Maybe not the best game, just in terms of excitement, all that kind of stuff. A great game, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, let's be clear here, just in terms of absolute wild atmosphere. For as long as I'll live, I'll never forget the dueling chants that were just deafening outside of the stadium, just waiting to get in to Arrowhead that particular night. But of course, what happened in the postseason was something that stuck in the craw of Missouri fans for years. Because despite beating Kansas, well, Missouri would lose its second game of the season to Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game. And, well, those two losses back in the BCS era, that was enough for whatever reason for the Orange Bowl to pick Missouri. And also there was some talk that, hey, Kansas promised that they would buy X, Y, and Z tickets. I don't really know how true that is. I don't frankly care enough to go back and look, because the real point here is that a lot of Missouri fans, like I said, it's stuck in their craw for years. To some Missouri fans, it still sticks in their craw, apparently, because I've had multiple viewers and listeners bring up this scenario. John, you're too confident. If Missouri goes 10-2, well, by God, the NCAA loves to screw the Tigers over, and watch, they'll do it again. That's been the general attitude I've heard from at least a small but vocal part of the fan base. Now, I can't tell you that that's impossible. I can't say that it's absolutely impossible that at 10-2, Missouri could get screwed out of the Big 12 or out of the college football playoff. Excuse me. But I really don't think that's very likely. And I think it's probably a less than 10% chance that would happen. Probably much less than that, to be honest, because this really is a different world than it was in 2008. I'm not talking about the portal or NIL here. I'm basically talking about the BCS world versus the college football playoff world, because back in the BCS world, wins and losses, period, were weighted much more heavily. So if you were an undefeated squad that had if you were at least an undefeated squad in a major conference, well, if a team in a better conference on paper, statistically, nobody would argue it these days, well, that one loss would really, really move that other team down more times than not. Again, it's a whole new world now. Now it's much more about the entire resume, not just if you lost a game or not. This isn't like an NFL suicide pool where you just have to move on to the next week. That was the old world of college football. Again, now the College Football Playoff Committee is looking at everything, especially the quality of your competition and the quality of your wins. This is something that Florida State, of course, last season discovered in rather harsh fashion as it went undefeated and found itself on the outside looking in of the college football playoff. Now, my point in bringing that up is not to rehash the Florida State argument for the 1 millionth time. My point here is that just pointing out reality, that the days of, hey, you go undefeated in the ACC and you're surefire in there for the national championship, for the college football playoff, well, those days are basically done. But in a world of 12 teams, there's no chance in a one-loss SEC team. I just can't see any world in which that happens. A one-loss SEC team misses the 12-teamer. That seems utterly impossible. Even at 10-2, I just really don't see that happening. Whether it's Missouri or it's Alabama or it's Ole Miss or it's Oklahoma or whoever the heck it might be who ends up at 10-2, I just can't see that team being on the outside looking in. So if you're a Missouri fan that's worried about the Orange Bowl thing happening over again, I just don't see it. And to be honest, while the Orange Bowl thing stung a little bit at the time, it was called a BCS Bowl back in the day. Really playing in the Cotton Bowl was not that much different than playing in the Orange Bowl at the end of the day. Because regardless, Missouri wasn't playing, nor Kansas were playing for a national championship or any other postseason crowns anyway. So I do think that, hey, if the college football playoff were a thing back then, I actually think Missouri probably would have gotten over Kansas anyway. Just all the bowl politics and sort of general weirdness of that time, I think, factored into for Missouri getting the slightly short end of the stick. I just don't see that scenario happening this time around. Again, if Missouri goes 9-3, well, then all bets are off. And frankly, they probably won't deserve to make the college football playoff in that scenario. But at 10-2, especially if that 10-2 comes, if it's an 11-2, let's say Missouri loses one game, makes the SEC championship game, then is 11-2 if we're going to make it just as close to the 2007 season as possible. Well, that's a scenario where I really think it's impossible. The second place team in the SEC, That's basically an automatic bid without actually being one. And let's talk some hoops to close out the program. Dennis Gates adding Trey Gomillion to his coaching staff. Is it possible that Trey could help Missouri find a lost art that has truly been lost, not only just at Missouri, but in much of college basketball as well? Also want to talk about how I think NCAA, in terms of officiating, should really follow the NBA's lead this coming season. Let's talk about all that after these quick words. Now, for all of Konzo Martin's faults, and he certainly had a few, I think one of Konzo Martin's obvious strengths, and in my opinion, he is the only Missouri basketball coach since Norm Stewart who's actually taught his team to box out, or at least emphasized that part of basketball. And it really, saying it's a lost art is almost a little bit too grandiose, because it's not really an art. What, putting your butt into a guy and getting between him and the basket? It's not an art. What it is a crucial, basic basketball fundamental, in my humble opinion. And the reason I bring this up is because we've seen Dennis Gates mention multiple times that, hey, would you rather win the rebounding battle or win the game? In other words, I think Dennis Gates more or less is a guy who's going to emphasize putting the ball in the basket. He wants guys who are skilled, can put the ball on the floor, pass, shoot, all that good stuff, more than he does some big burly guys who can take up space in the paint and collect a missed shot. And to a large extent, I totally agree with that. If I were a coach, and Lord knows I've never been a coach, but if I were, I would certainly be trying to recruit skill and teach the fundamentals, teach guys things like boxing out, for example. But the point here is, whether you agree with me on the actual boxing out thing or not, statistically, it's really, really hard to be an excellent basketball team if you don't rebound the ball. So far here, 2 seasons of Dennis Gates, and Missouri has been a well below average rebounding team. Not just in the SEC, I'm talking about nationally here. Out of the 350 or so Division I teams, Missouri's ranked about 250th or so in my opinion, the most important rebounding statistic, offensive rebounding percentage. And you look at every season in which Missouri has been in the 200s or so, every year of the Kim Anderson era, by the way, Missouri was in that 200s ranking, for example. Well, it's going to be hard to have a good team. And the only examples that are exceptions to that are the 2023 Missouri Tigers, Dennis Gates' first season. Hey, that was a top 10 nationally type of offense. Same thing with 2012, Frank Haith's first season, the number 1 offense in the country. Again, a bad rebounding team, a well below average rebounding team. Obviously, they made up for it with an excellent offense, but if you have that level of rebounding, it's just going to be hard to be an above-average defensive team. And without that above-average defense, it's also making it really hard to make a long run in the NCAA tournament as well. Also feels relevant that Connecticut, for example, Connecticut and Purdue, 2 of the absolute best rebounding teams in the nation last season, well, they played for the national championship. Also, they were the 2 of the best offensive and defensive teams as well. I just think that ignoring, if that is indeed what Dennis Gates is doing, I don't know that that's the case. If it really is just a matter of, hey, this is my preference, this is the trade-off I'm willing to make, maybe Missouri's rebounding will get better as the program is established, as you see guys like hopefully Peyton Marshall and Trent Burns, some big guys in the freshman class. Hopefully they continue to develop and give Missouri more size than it's had, especially effective size, the last couple seasons. But I will say this as well, and again, congrats to Trey Gomillion for being on the staff. I brought him up because I thought, really, once he went out a couple seasons ago, Missouri's rebounding and defense suffered tremendously. I thought he was an excellent rebounder while not being a big man. While he was obviously a guard, he was a wing for sure, but probably one of the best rebounders on the team that year, along with Kobe Brown, I would say. But again, let's shift the topic here just a little bit. And I do think something that we should see, a shift we should see next season that we saw during the middle of the NBA season. In fact, I'd like to see more physicality brought back. Guards, especially on dribble penetration, any defender, but especially guards, should be allowed a little bit more contact, a little bit more leeway to actually go chest to chest with a defender if you're actually moving your feet. Because last season, it just seemed like any contact that was initiated by the offensive player was an automatic foul on the defense. And you know what? For the first half of the NBA season, you saw the exact same thing. What you saw is a lot of scores in the 140s and 150s. And at a certain point, mid-season happened, the All-Star break happened, and I don't know what happened specifically, but clearly the way NBA games were officiated after the All-Star break changed completely. And some measure of physicality was brought back to defense. So there wasn't just constant whistles and constant free throws and defenders afraid to make any contact, basically allowing easy dribble penetration. So to me, the NBA did an excellent job, in my opinion. I thumbs up it for actually getting some balance back into that sport a little bit. I think, obviously, that the pendulum had swung too far that way toward protecting the offensive player from any type of physicality. I think NCAA, you saw the exact same thing. But what you didn't see the adjustment. So this season, I think the NCAA would be wise to make that adjustment. Everybody likes to see shots going in the basket. Sure, field goals going in. Nobody's going to complain about that. But fouls, though, stoppages, free throws, I don't think anybody's asking for that. So hopefully the NCAA and their officials specifically find a little bit more of a balance in 24-25. Well, hopefully I found a good football, basketball balance for you here on today's program. Gonna have at least one more, if not two episodes for you this week. So get ready for that. Get ready for more of me this week right here on Locked On Mizzou.